Welcome back, everybody, to the Great Compromise. I'm GOP Jam, and of course, I'm with Victoria the Democrat.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And before we get started, I want to thank everyone who follows us on social media and who's been listening and sharing this podcast with your friends. We really do appreciate it. Today's episode is on Universal Basic Income, or UBI. UBI is a government-guaranteed payment that each citizen would receive. Now, this week Victoria is on the pro side, and she is going to start us off.
This week, I am on the pro side. I am pro universal income. And I would like to start with some background, just so we're all a little more informed. Universal basic income doesn't exist yet, but from many different pilot programs and trials that have been conducted around the world, evidence suggests that getting a basic income increases health, happiness, school attendance, trust in social institutions, and it reduces crime. No negative corresponding outcomes have been seen as a result of these trials. People have looked for things such as higher unemployment rates or crime, and have only seen that universal basic income enables people to do more, not less. My first point is that UBI fights poverty. From what we've seen in countries that have tried these programs, it's clear that UBI makes a big positive impact on poverty. Beginning of March of 2020, Brazil began giving 25% of their population just $100 a month. And as a result, their poverty level has dropped to the lowest that it's been in over 40 years. 40 years! That's insane. From 2007 to 2012, Namibia has a UBI program that were clear with its results. Poverty rates dropped from 76% of the population to 37%, which is a 39% change. This took place over just the first year, and child malnutrition rates fell by 25% in just the first 6 months. Secondly, UBI increases health and growth. UBI trials have been shown to improve both physical and mental health. India had a UBI trial from 2013 to 2014. With the extra money, participants were able to afford medicine, gain access to clean water, create a more sanitary environment, eat more regularly, and their anxiety levels were understandably reduced as a result. A trial in Manitoba, Canada took place in the 70s, and that resulted in less hospitalizations for accidents, injury, and a lower level of mental health diagnoses. They also found that emergency room visits from domestic violence-related injury were reduced during the trial. Kenya has a UBI trial that is still underway, and they've already seen an increase in happiness, reduced stress, and depression, and overall more satisfaction with life was evident. These are powerful, life-altering changes. Imagine the impact this has on the development of a young child when their parents are able to provide and care for themselves better. This could lead to incredible global change. When individuals are impoverished, they do not have the resources to leave abusive homes. With UBI, people have the financial means to leave and create better lives for themselves and their children. The study in Namibia found that due to UBI, women's financial dependence on men was reduced. Pressure to participate in sex trade was relieved. UBI could also prevent the kind of adverse childhood experiences, which are also known as ACEs, which include things like abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction, that are strongly correlated with those who grow up to be adults with addiction, mental illness, legal problems, and more because of growing up in poverty, inequality, and social isolation. This can often be found to be the root of childhood ACEs. As stated by Matthew Smith, a PhD and professor of health and history at the University of Strathclyde, UBI could improve a range of mental health concerns in stressful situations proven to deteriorate mental health. Recent research has linked the stress of poverty with inflammation in the brain, which is correlated with mental health problems. Lastly, UBI is good for equality and education. With UBI, students would be enabled to stay in school longer and learn a trade or improve their skill in preparation for a profitable career. Uganda's UBI trial, called the Youth Opportunities Program, showed that with the extra money, people were able to invest in training, tools, and materials that increased their business assets by 57%. It increased work hours by 17% and their earnings by 38%. The Canadian trial that took place in the 70s, which I referred to earlier, found that those involved in the trial were more likely to complete high school than non-participants. A trial took place in India between 2013 and 14, and it was conducted by both UNICEF and the Sewa Bharat implementing universal basic income. Out of these trials came a lot of empowered women who experienced more equality in the household decisions, better access to food, better education, and more health care while receiving UBI. A 5-year trial in Namibia showed that with universal basic income, parents could afford school fees, buy more uniforms, support better attendance, and participation in school. The dropout rate improved. In 2007, nearly 40% of students dropped out, but in 2008, with the program in place, only 5% had. And in 2009, the rate was nearly zero. UBI helps people who are both stay-at-home parents and caregivers, those who typically make no income, because it empowers unpaid work that often falls to women. It also takes financial strain off of parents who can now spend more time with their families and create a more equal role in the home when working hours can be afforded to be altered or reduced.
Thank you, Victoria. And of course, I'm on the con side. First things first, UBI is too expensive. There are over 300 million Americans today. For math purposes, let's say UBI provided everyone with $10,000 a year, which is under the amount most plans call for. But that would cost more than $3 trillion a year. This single year figure equals more than 3/4 of the entire yearly federal budget and close to 100% of all tax revenue the federal government collects. So how do we even pay for this? Relying on tax increases just isn't plausible. A UBI that's financed primarily by tax increases would require the American people to accept a level of taxation that vastly exceeds anything in U.S. history. Some people advocate for replacing our current welfare programs with UBI, using the money we spend now on food stamps, unemployment, Medicaid, and the rest to fund it. But wouldn't that essentially be redistributing money upwards? We would be taking money from programs targeted towards helping the bottom fifth or so of the population and converting it to universal payments to people all the way up the income scale. That would increase poverty and inequality rather than reduce them. That's why even if we do use this method to help fund UBI, tens of millions of poor people would likely end up worse off. Even if the stars did align and we were somehow able to pay for this program, I'm not convinced it would be for the good for society. Earning your own income is what incentivizes people to work. If we pay people to do nothing, they will do nothing. And when people do nothing, the economy crashes. We just had a taste of that during COVID. Putting it on a permanent, larger scale would be devastating. In the 60s and 70s, the government did what they called guaranteed income trials, the results of which were those who received payments ended up working fewer hours. UBI fails for the same reason communism fails. If there is no incentive for people to work, they just won't.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to start with your last point, that people need to be motivated to work and that UBI would not help them with that. I feel like what UBI targets is more like the lack of motivation. I feel like when so many people are really disadvantaged, they feel like there's nothing that they can do to really help themselves anymore. There's like this apathy that sets in. And UBI would target that, right? Like we've seen that it increases business assets, work hours, and potential earnings. So it's not that I think it would make everybody just like sit on the couch expecting their check in the mail that month. You know, it's not enough for someone to live off of. It's enough to give them a boost.
Okay, I disagree. When we're talking about universal basic income, it is the opposite of targeted, right? It's universal. Everybody, like if we're talking about Andrew Yang's famous plan to give everybody in America $1,000 a month, right? That is not targeted. That is everybody gets X amount every month. And so I consider it much less effective and far less cost effective than targeted welfare programs that we have right now. Because many people lack more than just cash, right? And UBI doesn't cure addiction. It doesn't help people in poor health or give people an education. It doesn't do any of these things that contribute to and like exacerbate poverty, right? It gives money and it's not targeted to help the issues that make poverty worse. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I still think that $1,000 is not enough to live on every month. It's not going to create more unemployment. People still need to work, but it does give you some flexibility to try and pay for more of your healthcare bills or be able to afford rehab more easily, right? Like it gives you more choice. So it's not specific to how you need to spend this money like it would be for welfare programs, but it does give people more of an ability to work on their own stuff.
Okay. And in theory, that's very nice, but we have to be somewhat realistic about how we're going to pay for that, right? It's expensive.
What I notice is that your points are saying, here's the world's population, and then here's America's budget. Do I have that
No.
right?
I was talking about America's population, 300 million
Okay.
Americans. And if we gave everyone $10,000 a year, which is less than $1,000 a month, it would cost us $3 trillion a year, which is very expensive. And the options for paying for it are increase taxes a lot, or we get rid of the other welfare programs and use that money, which still wouldn't be enough, to pay for this instead.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't really do that, right? We are, or rather, baby boomers are very close to hitting their retirement age. Some of them already have, right? Which means that our costs for Social Security and Medicare are about to be higher than ever in history because there's so many of them, right? And there's just no realistic way for us to make good on those benefits and still afford a program like UBI. We would have to pull the rug out from under these people who are retiring in order to pay for this, or we would have to tax some absurd amount. Does that make sense? Like, we can't have our cake and eat it too. We can't do all of these things at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like maybe Universal isn't the realistic program, right? That everybody gets the same amount. But some kind of more consistent, like, supplemental income where people are able to still have more choice and flexibility with how they use it.
Okay, so what you're saying is that universal basic income should not be universal. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I understand your points around affording it,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm suggesting an alternative implementation of it. Not that universal income isn't the best option, but it might not be the most affordable or realistic option.
And we have to be realistic, right? When it would be nice if everyone got an ice cream cone. I probably used that line in an earlier episode, but it would be nice. But we have to be realistic. It's just not a plausible program for us. Money doesn't grow on trees, right? So what you're saying is, instead of universal income, we do another targeted welfare program, something like we have right now, that targets the people who are truly in need of this money. Is that what you were saying?
I'm looking at the results of the trials that I shared earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and so many of the outcomes are reduced child malnutrition, reduced starvation.
Yeah.
Like, throughout the entire world, people are able to finally get like clean water and better sanitation for like their living environments. And those are profound outcomes that really make me root for UBI. It's not about like American middle class. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you mean. All of the trials that you mentioned and the one that I mentioned, in fact, almost all of the trials for UBI that have ever happened have all been targeted, right? They've all been limited in scope and targeted for specific groups of people, especially the ones in Africa, like you mentioned. And so what I think that we are potentially, possibly coming to here is, instead of giving X amount of money to everybody all at once, we should instead have better or different or new welfare programs that target those in poverty.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the real like overlap that both sides have, like that seems like a natural focus instead of universal, right? Like the top 1% don't need a monthly paycheck. But I do also become like reminded of those programs too that are like you're investing your money in like small businesses like in Africa or whatever, and it's almost a way of like you're not lending them, you're investing so you get a return. Like if a program like that was a little bit more common as part of like our economy of like putting money into struggling businesses to then get a return, but it's not charity, it's like a more encouraged investment plan.
Okay.
Like as an aside, not
okay,
like...
yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I understand your logic, at least. But just to bring it back to UBI, even if we did give everyone $1,000 a month, say, I don't think it would end up really helping as much as we think. There would be companies that would see that and go, okay, I don't need to pay my employees as much because the government is providing everyone with X amount of money. And of course, there are going to be companies that, say Walmart is going to start increasing their prices because they know everyone has more money in their pocket. And so I think after a little while, everything's going to even out, and it's going to be like no one has that extra $1,000 a month at the end of it, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, where it's like if everyone has the same amount every month, then what's even really changing?
Exactly. It's too expensive to be realistic to implement. So far, the trials and tests that have existed have been targeted, so we've never really had a countrywide trial of UBI.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really know how it would be on a wide scale. And so I think it would just be much more effective to have the targeted programs like we have right now to really help the people in need, instead of just blindly throwing the same amount of money to everybody in the country. Personally, that's my takeaway.
I find that to be a good compromise. Yeah.
Oh, a great compromise?
Even a great compromise. Yeah, I'll give it that.
Excellent.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Great Compromise podcast. Please share it with your friends and help our podcast grow. Like our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages.
And Twitter.
And Twitter, and we'll be back next time.